Somewhere in a hardware store near you, there is a bottle on the shelf priced at $22. The label says Professional Rust Converter and uses words like Advanced Molecular Bonding Technology and Proprietary Oxide Stabilization Formula. It works exactly as advertised. What the label does not tell you is that the active ingredient inside that bottle is a powder you can buy in bulk for roughly $3, that it has been understood by metalworkers across 6 continents for over 2,000 years, and that the chemistry involved was documented in a French scientific journal before the American Civil War was even a distant political tension. The substance is tannic acid. The story of how it went from ancient blacksmith secret to overpriced shelf product is not a simple tale of corporate greed. It is something more interesting than that. It is a story about how economic systems quietly reshape what we consider common knowledge, and how the most durable solutions are sometimes the ones that nobody has any financial reason to remind you about. Let us start where iron itself starts, with the problem. Steel and iron are inherently unstable in the presence of oxygen and moisture. The moment you expose bare metal to humid air, an electrochemical reaction begins. Oxygen molecules bind to iron atoms at the surface, pulling electrons away and forming iron oxide, which is the crumbling, flaky orange substance we call rust. Left unchecked, rust is not just cosmetic. It eats inward, converting solid structural metal into brittle powder, weakening bridges in vehicle frames and tools until they fail completely. Every approach humans have taken to stop this process falls into one of two categories. You either create a barrier between the metal and the air, which is what paint and oil and wax coatings do, or you chemically alter the iron oxide itself so that it becomes something stable. The first approach is temporary by definition. Every coating eventually cracks, chips, or wears away, and the moment it does, the rust resumes exactly where it left off. The second approach is something else entirely. It is not a delay. It is a transformation, and the substance that makes that transformation possible has been hiding in plain sight inside oak bark and grape skins and tea leaves for thousands of years. The discovery, as most genuinely important discoveries tend to be, was an accident. In the workshops of ancient Rome, leather craftsmen spent their days soaking raw animal hides in enormous stone basins filled with water and crushed oak bark. The process softened and preserved the hides, converting them into durable leather through a chemical reaction between the organic compounds in the bark and the proteins in the skin. This practice was so common and so central to Roman commerce that entire districts of major cities were dedicated to it. The smell was apparently extraordinary, and not in a pleasant way. But inside those reeking vats, something else was happening that nobody initially set out to study. Iron tools that were dropped into the tanning solution by accident, or submerged to hold the hides down, came out looking different. Where bare iron would normally show rust within days in the damp Mediterranean air, iron that had been soaked in oak bark water emerged with a dark, almost bluish-black surface that seemed indifferent to moisture. Craftsmen noticed that these treated tools stayed clean and sharp for weeks longer than untreated ones. The information spread the way useful information always spreads in practical trades. Slowly, person to person, through direct observation rather than formal documentation. Roman military blacksmiths eventually began applying concentrated bark solutions to iron weapons and armor components before extended campaigns, particularly in northern Europe where the cold, wet climate accelerated corrosion dramatically. Fragments of record-keeping from frontier Roman outposts in what is now northern England reference maintenance procedures involving bark-based liquid baths for iron equipment. These are not dramatic proclamations. They are mundane logistical notes, the kind that document standard practice rather than innovation, which tells you that by the time those notes were written, treating iron with tannin solutions was already considered routine. The Romans were not alone in this knowledge, and the fact that other civilizations arrived at the same chemistry independently is perhaps the most compelling evidence that what they had discovered was not a trick or a superstition, but a genuine, observable, repeatable phenomenon. In Persia, metalworkers in the city of Isfahan used the rind of pomegranates, which contain extraordinary concentrations of tannic compounds, to treat sword blades against the brutal humidity swings of the region. In Japan, craftsmen working with the layered iron construction of traditional blades developed a technique using the fermented juice of unripe persimmons, a liquid extraordinarily rich in condensed tannins, applied to the softer iron layers before final tempering and assembly. The chemistry they were exploiting was identical to what Roman tanners had stumbled onto centuries earlier, even though no cultural transmission connected them. In West Africa, iron workers extracted tannin-rich compounds from the bark of certain acacia species and applied them to agricultural blades that needed to survive half a year of monsoon humidity with minimal maintenance. In the forests of South America, indigenous metal workers who had acquired iron tools through trade with European colonists developed their own preservation techniques using extracts from quebracho wood, one of the most tannin-dense timber species on the planet. What you are looking at across all of these independent examples is not coincidence. You are looking at convergent empirical discovery. Different cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, all observed the same reaction between plant-derived compounds and iron, all drew the same practical conclusion, and all integrated that conclusion into their working knowledge of metallurgy. The formal scientific explanation for what they had been doing arrived in Paris in the early 19th century. A French chemist named Henri Braconnot, working with colleagues in the field of organic chemistry, published detailed analysis of what he identified as tannin, isolating it as a distinct chemical compound and describing its specific reactions with iron compounds. The explanation he documented is the same one that materials scientists use today. Tannic acid, when it contacts iron oxide, specifically the ferric oxide that constitutes rust, triggers a chemical reaction that converts the rust into a new compound called ferric tannate. Ferric tannate is chemically stable, meaning it does not continue to react with oxygen or moisture in the way that iron oxide does. It is insoluble in water, meaning it does not dissolve or wash away. It does not flake, does not spread, and does not undermine the structural integrity of the metal beneath it. More importantly, it bonds directly to the metal surface at a molecular level, creating a layer that is not sitting on top of the metal but is chemically integrated with it. This is the distinction that separates conversion from coating, and it is the reason the protection it offers is fundamentally different in kind from what a layer of paint or oil can provide. A coating fails when it is breached. A conversion cannot be breached because there is nothing separate to breach. The rust has become the armor. The British Royal Navy understood this distinction well enough to conduct systematic trials with tannin solutions on iron warship hulls in the mid-19th century. The results, documented in Admiralty maintenance records, showed measurably lower corrosion rates on treated hulls compared to those protected only with the lead-based paints in standard use at the time. The Navy expanded testing to anchor chains and below waterline fittings, components that were exposed to corrosion conditions so severe that standard approaches required constant maintenance and frequent replacement. When the Second World War dramatically accelerated the pace of industrial military logistics, corrosion became an urgent strategic problem rather than a maintenance inconvenience. Steel equipment shipped across the Pacific and Atlantic arrived in tropical and humid coastal environments that accelerated rust at rates peacetime logistics had never needed to account for. American military researchers at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland conducted extensive comparative testing of anti-corrosion compounds on steel panels subjected to accelerated salt spray conditions designed to simulate years of real-world exposure in compressed timeframes. The results of that testing, declassified after the war ended, showed tannic acid solutions outperforming every synthetic rust inhibitor tested, and not by a narrow margin. Treated panels withstood salt spray exposure that caused synthetic competitors to fail at significantly earlier intervals. The military began sourcing tannic acid in quantity for use across multiple theaters. Jeep frames, artillery components, ammunition storage hardware, and bridging equipment were all treated with solutions that cost a fraction of any synthetic alternative. When the war ended, the industrial chemistry companies that had spent years and significant capital developing petroleum-based synthetic rust inhibitors faced a commercial problem with a straightforward structure. They had built manufacturing infrastructure, distribution networks, sales forces, and marketing operations around products whose main advantage over tannic acid was not performance, but profitability. Tannic acid is a naturally occurring compound. It cannot be patented. It is found in oak bark, in chestnut wood, in the skins of grapes, in black tea, in dozens of plant sources available in virtually every region of the world. A business built on selling tannic acid in bulk faces permanent price pressure because anyone with access to those plant sources can produce it cheaply. You cannot build a recurring revenue model around a solution that genuinely eliminates the problem it addresses. The economics of the coatings and rust treatment industry depend, not through conspiracy, but through straightforward commercial logic, on customers returning. A coating that lasts 18 months before it needs reapplication is, from a revenue standpoint, more valuable than a conversion treatment that lasts indefinitely. This is not a secret agenda. It is a structural incentive that shapes product development, marketing language, and shelf placement without requiring anyone to make an explicit decision to suppress anything. The result is a market landscape where tannic acid has been repackaged rather than concealed. Walk into any hardware store and look at the rust converter products on the shelf. Pick up any major brand and turn it around to read the safety data sheet reference information or the chemical composition section. Tannic acid will appear there, often listed under alternative nomenclature made possible by industry labeling conventions that allow proprietary trade names to substitute for standard chemical identifiers. The repackaging takes a naturally occurring, widely available powder, dissolves it in a petroleum-based solvent carrier, adds a small amount of phosphoric acid to address bare metal adhesion, packages it in a branded bottle with clinical-sounding language on the label, and prices it at 10 to 15 times the cost of the active ingredient purchased directly. The chemistry inside the expensive bottle is performing exactly the same molecular conversion that Roman tanners documented 2,000 years ago. The solvent carrier evaporates. The tannic acid does the work. Now here is what the practical application of this chemistry actually looks like, stripped of branding and commercial packaging. Food-grade tannic acid powder is available from bulk chemical suppliers, health food retailers, and online marketplaces. A 100-gram quantity costs between $3 and $6 depending on the source and is sufficient to treat a substantial surface area of rusted metal. You dissolve approximately 4 grams of the powder in 100 milliliters of warm water and stir until fully dissolved. The liquid will turn a deep amber brown, similar in color to strong black tea, which is not surprising given that tea contains significant concentrations of tannic acid. Before applying the solution, use a wire brush or coarse steel wool to remove any loose, flaking rust from the surface. You are not trying to reach bare bright metal. The point of this treatment is that it works on existing rust, so you only need to remove the loose material that would prevent good contact between the solution and the oxidized surface beneath. Apply the solution evenly using a foam brush, a cotton cloth, or a spray bottle. Within 10 to 15 minutes, you will observe a visible color change on the treated surface as the orange-brown rust begins shifting toward a dark blue-black. That color change is the ferric tannate forming in real time. The orange iron oxide is becoming something chemically different, something stable. Allow the surface to dry completely over the next 2 to 4 hours, then apply a second coat following the same process. After the second coat cures, the treated surface is ready to accept whatever top coat makes sense for the application. For camp tools and blades, a thin application of boiled linseed oil rubbed on with a cloth and allowed to polymerize provides an excellent finish. For vehicle undercarriages and frame components, a rubberized spray-on undercoating applied over the cured conversion layer provides additional mechanical protection against road debris. For cast iron cookware, the conversion treatment can be applied to rust spots, allowed to cure, and then the piece can be re-seasoned using normal oven seasoning technique. The iron tannate layer is food-safe once cured and does not interfere with the seasoning process. 100 grams of tannic acid powder is genuinely sufficient to treat the entire undercarriage frame of a full-size truck, a complete collection of hand tools, and ongoing maintenance of cast iron cookware across a full year of use. What is worth sitting with when you reach the end of this particular story is not outrage at any specific industry or company. What is worth sitting with is the more general observation about how knowledge moves through time and economic systems. The most effective solution to a problem is not always the one that gets remembered, taught, distributed, or recommended. Sometimes the most effective solution is the one with the fewest financial advocates. Tannic acid has no patent holder lobbying for its inclusion in vocational training curricula. It has no marketing budget ensuring that mechanics and restoration hobbyists encounter it early and often. It has no brand identity that creates the kind of recognition that makes a solution feel credible and trustworthy to someone who has never heard of it before. What it has is 2,000 years of empirical validation across cultures that had no contact with each other, a mechanism of action that has been understood at the molecular level for nearly 2 centuries, and a price point that makes it accessible to almost anyone. The gap between what that profile should produce in terms of widespread adoption and what has actually happened tells you something worth knowing about how the availability of information is shaped by the economic interests surrounding it. Not through dramatic suppression, not through shadowy coordination, simply through the quiet, structural logic of who benefits from you knowing something and who benefits from you not knowing it. Simple knowledge does not disappear. It gets repriced, it gets renamed, it gets buried under layers of professional language and premium packaging until it feels like something you could not possibly replicate in your own driveway with a $5 bag of powder and a foam brush. But the chemistry has never changed. The oak trees are still growing, the tannins are still in the bark, and the rust on your tools is still waiting to be converted into something that will never move again.